I want to briefly talk about the boy who lived. I don't really take a deep dive into him in the book Uncurable, From Hopeless Diagnosis to Defying Odds, but my son, Khalil, is the boy who lived. If you're a Harry Potter fan, you know what that references to. But when my son was about 8 years old, he was in an elevator accident and was crushed in an elevator. And miraculously, it's actually, I would say it was an act of God. Not sure your faith belief, but it's a miracle he didn't die because it literally stopped holding his head. If you ever seen, you'll see a little scar here on his head where he literally was clamped in there and held by that, hanging off for about 20 minutes before EMS got him. Obviously traumatic, but one of the results was he had 90+% damage of his left facial nerve. And so we had pictures of that in the hospital where his face was blown up and he couldn't smile. And it was traumatic to the family, traumatic to my wife, because, you know, our one quote unquote normal child now had potentially brain damage. Went to the hospital. It was one of those things where you got to go to the hospital, right? You have to go, you know, when the EMS calls you and says your son's head looks like it's crushed, and they say we're taking you to the nearest neurosurgical place, you just say, okay, I'll meet you there. And so got there. Fortunately, his skull wasn't crushed, but he did have 90% damage of his left facial nerve, and utilized the healthcare system. At that point in time, we needed to go to the pediatric trauma, neurosurgery trauma place. We needed to do all the fancy testing, yada, yada. A week later, we went and had nerve conduction studying that showed indeed he did have a 90 to 95% destruction of that left facial nerve. And the prognosis was it might get better, it might not. We could do surgery, which usually doesn't work very well. And that's all I need to hear. I need to hear, like, your options aren't that great. I've got options. And so did our functional medicine after the conventional stuff, used LED light therapy, low-level light therapy over the damaged nerve to help regrow it. Also used TENS, transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, because at that point in time, the nerve was still like living. It hadn't done what's called Wallerian degeneration and shrunk back. So I was able to stimulate the nerve, and the nerve kind of, and one of the things in clinical bench research showed that it'll actually reconnect itself if you catch it early, which fortunately we did. So using TENS, and it was really funny. He hated it. He was like, "Dad, it hurts. Dad," you know, he's like, you know, whatever. It's like, yeah, I know, kid. Yeah, high dose omega-3s. Interesting research on low dose naltrexone after spinal cord injuries, actually improving function after injury. So we did these things with him, and over the period of 4 to 6 weeks, he gained back facial nerve function. The reason I want to mention that, the boy who lived, because one, you know, if you ever hear about kids dying in elevators, this is exactly how they die. So it's a miracle he survived. But also, like, the fact that today, you know, within a year, you couldn't change. It's actually kind of funny. He learned how to, like, not move his facial muscles because they didn't work for weeks. So he's able to do this thing, which I can't do, where he'll, like, do this thing where he, like, makes his face come down. And for a while, he would do that to my wife, and it would trigger her, and she'd be like, oh, I get all upset, and he'd just kind of laugh, yeah, Mom, you know, because he could make it look like his face wasn't working. But it did cause trauma. It did cause, you know, having it to him, to my daughters as well, and learning about how that interacts with family dynamics. But even years later, seeing how if my son gets trapped in an environment, he does have a little bit of a trauma response, and how he's grown up. He's now just about ready to turn 15, how he's worked through it. But the point is combining both traditional medicine when we acutely needed it, and then integrative functional medicine, doing some things outside the box actually helped heal his nerve, so that, you know, within 3 to 4 months, he looked 100% normal. And within a year, he was 100% normal, with a minor scar here and a scar here on his head. But the point is that there's all these really interesting, cool things out there. Whenever I have a patient come in with a diagnosis I've never heard of before, never seen before, it doesn't really happen that much anymore, but it used to happen quite frequently years ago. I would just take deep dives and realize the connection between CIDP, which is a demyelinating thing, and Guillain-Barré, and acute demyelinating encephalomyelitis, and just kind of seeing it, hey, these are rare things that I do see in my clinic from time to time because they're rare. But you realize everything's connected. Everything absolutely is connected. Unrelated things, unconnected things, they're really connected. You know, one analogy I like to give people with the way our minds work is how complicated is life? This is a really cool analogy here. Life on Earth requires liquid magma under the crust. The magma flows and creates a flux. So if you look at a compass, that's the north-south direction of a compass needle. And that flux prevents the solar winds, which are these winds that come off the sun, from shearing off the ozone layer of our atmosphere, which would result in us not being able to survive on our planet. And then the Schumann forces, which are, if you look at that compass needle, it vibrates about 7.83 hertz, are resonance created by lightning strikes across the planet. Just happens to correlate with the alpha brainwave activity of all mammals on the planet. So all of a sudden, is there a connection between liquid magma in your health? And the answer is yes. We actually are now using electromagnetic devices to treat depression, to treat brain injuries. There was this interesting study. They took a bunch of college males. They probably can't do these studies anymore. And they put them in a mu box, which is a box that blocked electromagnetic energy from the earth. And within a week, the college students were eating, hugging each other, and depressed. Strange. We also know that with astronauts who go into outer space, who are out there, for weeks and weeks, who lose muscle mass or strength, it's actually not the gravity, because in orbit, gravitational force of the plane is 90% of what it is on the surface. What you're being distanced from is the electromagnetic fields on the Earth's surface that affect bone strength. Actually, these electromagnetic fields create a thing called a piezoelectric effect, which is the same thing as, there's the old time gas grills. I think they still have them actually. You push a little button, it clicks and makes a spark. The electromagnetic fields do that in your bones, just like walking does, and so they actually help with bone strength. So it's really interesting to see how all these things are connected. If our life, health, and existence is that interconnected with literally liquid iron moving underneath the planet, I have a hard time believing things that are much closer in proximity can't be possibly related. So one of my sayings is it's all connected. You got to connect the dots. There are no unrelated health issues. It's just we haven't figured out how to relate them quite yet. And when you have that perspective, it's amazing what you can see. So look for a practitioner who thinks like that, who thinks outside the box, who does think integratively, because with all the science out there, the more we learn about our environment, environmental medicine, water damaged buildings, environmental toxicology, even air science, air quality, like the amount of particulates called PM 2.5 in the air affect your body's inflammation. All of a sudden, everything is kind of sort of connected. So hope that's helpful. Hopefully you also learn to think about how your health is connected with your environment, with your house, with your school. Schools are a great example of buildings that have a lot of mold, and it's interesting how kids get sick in the fall when they go back to schools, and teachers do as well, related to the particles in the air from the air conditioning units being cut off all summer long. It's all connected, right? And so hopefully as you read through Uncurable, From Hopeless Diagnosis to Defying All Odds, you realize that your health is connected with lots of different things. And hopefully it's to stimulate you to take control of your health, find a good partner to work with. And I'll leave with this last saying. There's a saying that a person who has their health has 1,000 dreams, and a person who doesn't have their health has but one dream, and that's actually to be healthy. So my goal, wish for you is that through reading the book Uncurable, through watching these videos, through consuming our educational products, or whatever, however you interact with us, this helps you maintain your health so that you can live that life of dreams that you want to live. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.